In the fall of 1874, deep within the pine forests of northern Maine, a discovery was made that would shake the foundations of American education forever. 48 students from the prestigious Thornfield Academy had vanished without a trace. During a single semester, leaving behind only empty dormitories and a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. The Academy, once considered the finest preparatory school in New England, now stands abandoned, its halls echoing with questions that no one has been able to answer for over a century. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The children who disappeared ranged in age from 12 to 18, sons and daughters of the most prominent families in America. They came from Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and even as far as Chicago, drawn to Thornfield Academy by its reputation for academic excellence and moral instruction. When the first snows of winter began to fall, their families expected letters describing holiday plans and academic achievements. Instead, they received telegrams that would haunt them forever. Your child is missing. Location unknown. Investigation ongoing. The official records from the Cumberland County Sheriff's Department, sealed in the Maine State Archives for decades, describe a scene that defied all logical explanation. When authorities finally gained access to the Academy grounds in December 1874, they found buildings that appeared to have been abandoned in haste. Meals sat half-eaten in the dining hall. Books lay open on desks in empty classrooms, and personal belongings remained scattered throughout the dormitories. It was as if 48 young people had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind no clue as to their fate or whereabouts. Before we dive deeper into this incredible mystery that has puzzled investigators for generations, I need to tell you something important. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the truth behind America's most baffling disappearances and unexplained events. If you're the kind of person who needs answers, who can't rest until mysteries are solved, then you've found your home. Hit that subscribe button right now and join thousands of truth seekers who refuse to let these stories fade into history. And let me know in the comments, what's the most mysterious disappearance you've ever heard about? Have you ever been to Maine and felt like something wasn't quite right? The question that has haunted researchers, historians, and amateur investigators for over a century is simple yet terrifying. How do 48 people disappear from a secure, well-staffed institution without leaving behind a single reliable witness or piece of evidence? The answer, as we'll discover, lies buried in the dark secrets of Thornfield Academy and the twisted ambitions of those who controlled it. Maine in 1874 was a state in transition. The lumber industry was booming, bringing wealth and workers to previously isolated communities. The railroad had finally reached the northern counties, connecting remote towns to the bustling cities of the South. In this atmosphere of growth and opportunity, educational institutions like Thornfield Academy represented the promise of a better future for America's children. Parents willingly paid enormous sums to ensure their sons and daughters received the finest education available, never imagining that their trust would be so horrifically betrayed. Thornfield Academy was established in 1851 by a group of wealthy Boston businessmen who wanted to create an educational institution that would rival the finest schools in Europe. They purchased nearly 2,000 acres of pristine Maine wilderness, complete with lakes, forests, and rolling hills that provided the perfect setting for contemplation and learning. The main campus consisted of 5 magnificent buildings constructed from local granite, each designed to house different aspects of academic and residential life. The centerpiece of the campus was Whitmore Hall, a 4-story Gothic revival structure that housed the library, lecture halls, and administrative offices. To the east stood Pemberton House and Aldrich House, the dormitories that accommodated the student body in comfortable private rooms. The dining hall, known as Commons Building, featured soaring ceilings and large windows that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding wilderness. Finally, the science hall contained laboratories, workshops, and specialized classrooms for advanced studies in natural philosophy and mechanical arts. What made Thornfield Academy truly unique was not just its beautiful facilities, but its revolutionary approach to education. The school operated on a year-round basis, with students remaining on campus during traditional holiday periods to pursue intensive studies and character development. This system, promoted as providing uninterrupted focus and maximum educational benefit, also meant that students had minimal contact with their families for months at a time. Parents were assured that this separation was necessary for their children to develop independence and intellectual maturity. Dr. Edmund Thornfield, the Academy's founder and headmaster, was considered one of the most brilliant educators of his generation. A graduate of Harvard College and the University of Edinburgh, he had traveled extensively throughout Europe, studying educational methods and philosophy. His writings on childhood development and moral instruction were widely respected among intellectual circles in Boston and New York. To parents seeking the best possible education for their children, Dr. Thornfield represented the pinnacle of academic excellence and moral authority. The faculty that Dr. Thornfield assembled at his academy was equally impressive. Professor William Ashford, who taught mathematics and natural philosophy, had studied at Cambridge University and published several papers on advanced mathematical theory. Miss Carolyn Whitmore, the Academy's head of classical studies, was fluent in 7 languages and had spent 5 years studying ancient texts in Rome and Athens. Mr. James Morrison, who oversaw the students' physical education and outdoor activities, was a former military officer who had served with distinction in the Civil War. These accomplished educators worked together to create an environment that promised to transform ordinary children into exceptional young adults. The Academy's curriculum went far beyond traditional subjects like mathematics, literature, and history. Students studied philosophy, astronomy, advanced sciences, and even experimental subjects like psychology and social theory. They were encouraged to think independently, to question established ideas, and to develop their own understanding of the world around them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The daily routine at Thornfield Academy was carefully structured to maximize both learning and character development. Students rose at dawn for physical exercise, followed by a simple breakfast and morning chapel service. The academic day included 6 hours of formal instruction, with subjects rotating throughout the week to ensure comprehensive coverage. Afternoons were devoted to laboratory work, independent study, and outdoor activities that took advantage of the beautiful Maine wilderness surrounding the campus. Evenings at Thornfield were designed to promote intellectual discussion and social development. Students gathered in comfortable common rooms to debate philosophical questions, share their writing and artistic creations, and participate in games and activities that encouraged cooperation and friendship. The Academy's library, considered one of the finest private collections in New England, remained open until late in the evening, allowing dedicated students to pursue their interests without restriction. What parents didn't realize was that this carefully controlled environment also provided perfect conditions for something far more sinister than education. The isolation of the campus, the minimal contact with the outside world, and the absolute authority exercised by Dr. Thornfield and his staff created a situation where almost anything could happen without detection. The very features that made Thornfield Academy seem so appealing to wealthy parents also made it the perfect setting for a disappearance that would shock the nation. The students who attended Thornfield Academy during the fall semester of 1874 represented some of the most promising young people in America. They came from families of great wealth and influence, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of parents who had sacrificed enormous amounts to provide the finest education available. Among them was 16-year-old Margaret Blackwood, daughter of a prominent New York banker, who showed exceptional talent in literature and languages. Her roommate, 15-year-old Sarah Pemberton from Boston, was considered a prodigy in mathematics and natural sciences. The male students were equally impressive. 18-year-old James Aldrich, heir to a shipping fortune from Philadelphia, demonstrated remarkable leadership abilities and was being groomed for a career in politics or business. His closest friend, 17-year-old Michael Whitmore, came from a family of distinguished physicians and showed great promise in medical studies. These were not ordinary children, but young people destined for greatness, which made their disappearance all the more shocking and mysterious. Dr. Thornfield had carefully selected this particular group of students for reasons that would not become clear until much later. Each family represented not just wealth, but specific types of influence and connections that could prove valuable for his ultimate plans. The banker's daughter, the politician's son, the physician's heir, and dozens of others from similarly powerful families were all pieces in a larger puzzle that Dr. Thornfield had been assembling for years. The academic year at Thornfield Academy began in September 1874 with great promise and excitement. Parents had delivered their children to the beautiful campus with confidence that they were providing the finest educational opportunity available. Letters sent home during the first weeks of the semester described an environment of intellectual stimulation and personal growth. Students wrote enthusiastically about their classes, their teachers, and their fellow students. Everything seemed to be proceeding exactly as Dr. Thornfield had promised. However, as autumn progressed into early winter, the tone of these letters began to change in subtle but disturbing ways. Students wrote less frequently, and when they did, their communication seemed oddly formal and distant. Parents who tried to visit the academy were told that the students were too busy with important examinations and projects to receive visitors. Requests for holiday visits home were denied, with explanations that the intensive academic program could not be interrupted without serious consequences for the students' progress. By November, some parents were becoming concerned about the lack of communication from their children. When they wrote directly to Dr. Thornfield requesting more information, they received polite but firm responses explaining that the students were entering a crucial phase of their education that required complete focus and dedication. Any outside interference, he explained, could undermine months of careful progress and potentially harm the students' intellectual and moral development. The first clear sign that something was seriously wrong came in early December when Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwood attempted to visit her daughter Margaret without prior permission. She had traveled from New York to Maine specifically to surprise her daughter and to see firsthand how she was progressing in her studies. When she arrived at the academy gates, she was told by the groundskeeper that no visitors were permitted and that Dr. Thornfield was not available to meet with her. Mrs. Blackwood was not a woman who accepted such treatment easily. As the wife of one of New York's most powerful bankers, she was accustomed to having her requests respected and her concerns addressed promptly. She demanded to speak with someone in authority and insisted on seeing her daughter immediately. The groundskeeper, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, eventually agreed to summon one of the faculty members to speak with her. Professor Ashford emerged from the main building after nearly an hour of waiting. He appeared nervous and distracted as he explained that all the students were currently engaged in important examinations that could not be interrupted under any circumstances. When Mrs. Blackwood insisted that she would wait until the examinations were completed, Professor Ashford claimed that the testing period would continue for several more weeks and that any disruption could seriously damage her daughter's academic standing. Something about Professor Ashford's manner and explanations struck Mrs. Blackwood as false and evasive. She had expected to find a confident educator eager to discuss her daughter's progress. Instead, she encountered a man who seemed anxious to end their conversation as quickly as possible. When she asked specific questions about Margaret's studies and activities, his answers were vague and unconvincing. Most disturbing of all, he seemed unable to provide any concrete details about her daughter's daily routine or recent achievements. Mrs. Blackwood left the academy that day with a growing sense of unease, but she had no idea that her daughter and 47 other students had already been missing for over a week. The elaborate deception that Dr. Thornfield and his remaining staff were maintaining would continue for several more days before the full horror of the situation would finally be revealed to the outside world. The truth about what had happened at Thornfield Academy began to emerge on December 15th, when a local mail carrier noticed that the academy's mailbox had been overflowing for days with undelivered letters and packages. This was unusual because the school typically received and sent large amounts of correspondence on a regular basis. When the carrier rode up the long driveway to the main campus, he found something that made his blood run cold. The entire academy appeared to be deserted. No smoke rose from the chimneys despite the bitter December cold. No light shone in any of the windows, even though darkness was falling. Most eerily of all, there were no sounds of human activity anywhere on the campus. The mail carrier, a man named Thomas Murphy, who had been delivering to the academy for years, knew that something was terribly wrong. Murphy rode his horse to the nearest town and immediately reported his observations to the local constable. Within hours, a small group of men had assembled to investigate the apparently abandoned academy. What they found when they gained entry to the buildings would haunt them for the rest of their lives and launch an investigation that would eventually involve law enforcement agencies from multiple states. The investigation that began on that cold December evening would reveal a level of deception and planning that shocked even experienced law enforcement officers. When Constable Henry Morrison and his team of volunteers finally broke through the locked doors of Thornfield Academy, they discovered a scene that defied all logical explanation. The buildings were not just empty. They had been systematically cleared of almost all evidence that 48 students had ever lived there. The dormitories told the most disturbing story, while personal belongings remained scattered throughout the rooms, creating the illusion of recent occupation. Closer inspection revealed that these items had been carefully arranged to suggest a hasty departure. Books lay open to specific pages, clothing was folded in particular ways, and personal letters were positioned where they would be easily discovered. It was as if someone had created a theatrical set designed to tell a specific story about what had happened to the missing students. Constable Morrison, who had served as a detective in Boston before retiring to rural Maine, immediately recognized that they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple case of missing persons. The level of planning and attention to detail suggested that whoever was responsible had been preparing for this moment for a considerable time. Every aspect of the scene had been carefully orchestrated to create maximum confusion and misdirection. The dining hall provided the most chilling evidence of the deception. Tables were set for the evening meal, with plates and silverware arranged, as if students were expected to arrive at any moment. Food had been placed on the tables, but it was clear that the meal had been prepared days earlier and left to spoil. The kitchen showed signs of hasty abandonment, with pots and pans scattered about and ingredients left to rot. However, the pantries and storage areas had been completely emptied of all supplies. Dr. Thornfield's office in Whitmore Hall revealed the most shocking discoveries. The normally organized space had been ransacked, with papers scattered across the floor and filing cabinets left open and empty. However, among the chaos, investigators found several documents that had apparently been overlooked in the hasty evacuation. These papers would provide the first clues about the true nature of what had been happening at Thornfield Academy. The documents included correspondence with individuals and organizations that had no apparent connection to education. There were letters discussing financial arrangements, shipping schedules, and delivery dates written in language that seemed more appropriate for a commercial enterprise than an academic institution. Most disturbing were the detailed records that appeared to catalog the students not as individuals, but as inventory items with specific characteristics and values. One particularly damning document was a ledger that listed each student by name along with detailed information about their family backgrounds, financial resources, and what were described as marketable qualities. Margaret Blackwood was described as intelligent, attractive, and from a family with extensive banking connections. James Aldrich was noted for his leadership potential and political family ties. The cold, calculating language used to describe these young people made it clear that they had been viewed not as students, but as commodities. The investigation team also discovered evidence that Dr. Thornfield had been communicating with contacts in multiple states and even international locations. Telegrams found in his desk drawers contained references to deliveries, shipments, and transfers that had nothing to do with academic matters. The language was coded, but the implications were terrifying. It appeared that Thornfield Academy had been operating as something far more sinister than an educational institution. As word of the discovery spread, parents from across the country began descending on the small Maine town of Millbrook, demanding answers about their missing children. The local constable was quickly overwhelmed by the scope of the investigation and the pressure from powerful families who wanted immediate action. Within days, federal marshals had been called in to coordinate what was becoming one of the largest missing persons cases in American history. The federal investigation, led by Marshal David Richardson, began by conducting detailed interviews with anyone who had recent contact with Thornfield Academy. What emerged was a pattern of carefully maintained isolation that had prevented outsiders from gaining any real insight into the daily operations of the school. Delivery drivers reported that they were never allowed beyond the main gate. Service providers were escorted to specific locations and prevented from exploring the campus freely. Local residents who had lived near the academy for years admitted that they had always found the institution somewhat mysterious. Students were rarely seen in town, and when faculty members did appear for supplies or business, they were polite but distant. The academy had always maintained a reputation for exclusivity and privacy that discouraged casual interaction with the surrounding community. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Marshal Richardson decided to search the extensive wilderness surrounding the academy campus. The 2,000 acres of forest, lakes, and hills that had made Thornfield so attractive to parents also provided countless hiding places where evidence might be concealed. Teams of searchers began combing through the dense woods, looking for any clue that might explain what had happened to the missing students. On the third day of the wilderness search, a team led by Deputy Marshal James Crawford made a discovery that changed the entire direction of the investigation. Deep in the forest, nearly 2 miles from the main campus, they found a large clearing that showed clear signs of recent human activity. The ground had been disturbed over a wide area, and there were remnants of what appeared to have been temporary structures or shelters. More disturbing were the personal items found scattered throughout the clearing. Pieces of clothing that matched descriptions provided by parents, books with students' names written inside the covers, and other belongings that clearly came from the missing young people. The items appeared to have been abandoned in haste, as if their owners had been forced to leave suddenly without time to gather their possessions. The clearing also contained evidence of campfires and cooking areas that suggested a large group of people had been living there for an extended period. The searchers found remnants of food, cooking utensils, and makeshift sleeping areas that could have accommodated dozens of individuals. However, there were no signs of the students themselves, only the haunting evidence that they had been there and then vanished once again. This discovery led to an expanded search of the entire region. with additional teams brought in from neighboring states. The investigation was beginning to reveal that whatever had happened at Thornfield Academy was part of a much larger operation that extended far beyond the borders of Maine. The careful planning and coordination suggested that Dr. Thornfield had not been working alone, but was part of an organized network with resources and connections across multiple states. The breakthrough that would crack the case wide open came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton, mother of missing student Sarah Pemberton, had been conducting her own investigation while the official search continued. As a woman of considerable intelligence and determination, she refused to simply wait for authorities to find her daughter. Her private inquiries would uncover information that had eluded the federal investigators. Mrs. Pemberton had been corresponding with other parents of missing students, sharing information and coordinating their own search efforts. Through these communications, she discovered that several of the students had sent letters home in the weeks before their disappearance that contained subtle but disturbing hints about their situation. When these letters were examined collectively, a pattern emerged that suggested the students had been trying to communicate their distress without alerting their captors. Sarah Pemberton's final letter home contained references to being excited about an upcoming field expedition that would allow the students to study natural sciences in a more practical setting. Other students had written about similar expeditions, camping trips, and outdoor educational experiences that were supposedly planned for late November. Parents had initially viewed these activities as positive aspects of the Academy's innovative educational approach. However, when Mrs. Pemberton compared the dates and details mentioned in these letters, she realized that all of the supposed expeditions were scheduled for the same time period, and all involved the entire student body leaving the main campus for extended periods. This was highly unusual for an academic institution and suggested that the expeditions were not what they appeared to be. Mrs. Pemberton shared her findings with Marshall Richardson, who immediately recognized the significance of her discovery. The expeditions provided the perfect cover for removing the students from the academy without raising immediate suspicion. Parents would expect a temporary interruption in correspondence during outdoor activities, and the isolation of the wilderness would prevent any outside observation of what was actually happening to their children. This revelation led to a focused investigation of Dr. Thornfield's background and connections. What the investigators discovered was shocking in its scope and implications. Edmund Thornfield was not who he claimed to be. The prestigious educational credentials, the scholarly publications, and even his name were all elaborate fabrications designed to create a credible identity for a man whose true background was far more sinister. The real Edmund Thornfield had died in Scotland 15 years earlier while studying at the University of Edinburgh. The man who had founded Thornfield Academy had assumed his identity and used forged documents to establish himself in American academic circles. His true name was Marcus Hawley, and he had a criminal history that included charges of fraud, kidnapping, and human trafficking in 3 different countries. The investigation into Hale's background revealed connections to criminal organizations that specialized in the trafficking of human beings across international borders. The network operated by promising educational opportunities, employment prospects, or other legitimate benefits to lure victims into situations where they could be controlled and exploited. Thornfield Academy had been the most sophisticated operation yet attempted by this network, using the prestige of education to gain access to victims from wealthy and influential families. The discovery of Haley's true identity led to a coordinated international investigation involving law enforcement agencies from the United States, Canada, and several European countries. The network that had operated Thornfield Academy was revealed to be part of a larger criminal enterprise that had been trafficking people across multiple continents for over a decade. Evidence found in Hale's private correspondence revealed that the 48 missing students had been carefully selected not just for their family connections, but for specific qualities that made them valuable commodities in international markets. Young people from wealthy families were in high demand in certain parts of the world, where they could be used for various forms of exploitation or held for ransom from their powerful relatives. The investigation also revealed that Thornfield Academy had not been Hale's first attempt at this type of operation. He had previously established smaller institutions in other locations, each serving as a testing ground for the methods that were perfected at Thornfield. The academy represented the culmination of years of planning and preparation, designed to be his most ambitious and profitable venture. As the scope of the criminal network became clear, the investigation expanded to include searches of locations across multiple states and countries. The 48 missing students were not just victims of a single crime, but casualties of a sophisticated international trafficking operation that had been operating undetected for years. The beautiful campus of Thornfield Academy had been nothing more than an elaborate trap designed to ensnare some of America's most promising young people. The parents of the missing students found themselves facing a nightmare that extended far beyond their worst fears. Their children had not simply been kidnapped or harmed by a local criminal. They had been caught up in an international conspiracy that treated human beings as merchandise to be bought and sold across continents. The prestigious education they had sought for their children had instead delivered them into the hands of some of the most dangerous criminals in the world. The investigation continued with renewed urgency as authorities raced to follow the trail of evidence before it grew cold. Every day that passed reduced the chances of finding the missing students alive and safe. The network that had taken them had resources, connections, and experience that made them formidable opponents for even the most skilled law enforcement officers. However, the determination of the parents, the dedication of the investigators, and the growing international cooperation in the case provided hope that justice might eventually be served. The story of Thornfield Academy had shocked the world and brought attention to the dangers faced by vulnerable people everywhere. The search for the 48 missing students would continue, driven by the belief that no criminal network, no matter how sophisticated or well-connected, should be allowed to destroy innocent lives with impunity. The case had also revealed the power of parents who refuse to accept easy answers or give up hope for their children. Mrs. Pemberton's private investigation had uncovered crucial evidence that professional investigators had missed. Her determination to find the truth had helped expose a criminal conspiracy that might otherwise have continued operating undetected. The courage and persistence of ordinary people had proven to be one of the most powerful weapons against organized crime. The international manhunt for Marcus Howley and his criminal network would become one of the most extensive law enforcement operations of the 19th century. What began as a search for missing students had evolved into a race against time to dismantle a trafficking organization that spanned multiple continents. The courage and determination shown by investigators and families would inspire similar efforts for generations to come, proving that even the most powerful criminal enterprises could be brought down by ordinary people who refuse to give up. Marshall Richardson's investigation team had grown to include agents from federal agencies, international law enforcement representatives, and private investigators hired by the desperate families. This unprecedented cooperation between different organizations and countries demonstrated what could be accomplished when people united behind a common cause. The case was breaking new ground in international criminal justice, establishing procedures and protocols that would be used to combat organized crime for decades to follow. The breakthrough that would lead to the first concrete evidence of the defied students' whereabouts came from an unlikely source. A telegraph operator in Portland, Maine, named William Foster, had been monitoring communications as part of his routine duties when he noticed patterns in coded messages that seemed suspicious. Foster was a former military communications specialist who had developed an eye for detecting hidden meanings in seemingly innocent correspondence. Over several weeks, Foster had observed multiple telegrams being sent from various locations throughout New England to addresses in Canada, Europe, and South America. The messages appeared to be routine business communications, but their timing and frequency suggested coordination between different parties. More importantly, the language used in these messages contained subtle references that Foster recognized as possible trafficking terminology. Foster's decision to report his observations to federal authorities provided investigators with their first real-time intelligence about the network's current operations. The coded telegrams revealed that the trafficking organization was still active and that the missing students might still be alive somewhere within their system. This discovery energized the entire investigation and provided hope to families who had begun to fear the worst. The decoded messages revealed a complex operation involving multiple transportation routes and temporary holding facilities spread across North America. The students from Thornfield Academy had apparently been divided into smaller groups and moved through different channels to make tracking more difficult. Some groups had been transported north into Canada, others had been moved south toward major ports, and a few had been taken west toward territories where law enforcement presence was minimal. One particularly significant message intercepted by Foster contained references to a large shipment being prepared for overseas transport from the port of Halifax, Nova Scotia. The timing of this message coincided with when the Thornfield students would have reached that location if they had been moved immediately after their disappearance. Federal agents were dispatched to Halifax to investigate, working closely with Canadian authorities who had joined the international effort. The investigation in Halifax led to the discovery of a sophisticated smuggling operation that had been using legitimate shipping companies as cover for human trafficking activities. Criminal agents had infiltrated several shipping firms and were using their cargo vessels to transport victims to buyers in Europe and South America. The scale of the operation was staggering, with evidence suggesting that hundreds of people had been trafficked through this network over the past several years. Canadian investigators, led by Inspector Robert MacLeod of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, had been tracking suspicious shipping activities for months without realizing their connection to the Thornfield case. The international cooperation sparked by the missing students case allowed different law enforcement agencies to share information and connect seemingly unrelated criminal activities. This collaboration would prove to be one of the most important developments in the fight against organized crime. The combined investigation teams focused their attention on 3 specific vessels that had departed Halifax during the time period when the Thornfield students might have been transported. The ships had sailed to Liverpool, Hamburg, and Buenos Aires, carrying what appeared to be routine cargo, but following unusual routes that suggested attempts to avoid official inspection. Agents were dispatched to each destination to coordinate with local authorities and track the movements of these suspicious vessels. The investigation in Liverpool yielded the first major breakthrough in locating the missing students. British authorities, working with information provided by American agents, discovered a warehouse district where several young Americans had been held before being distributed to buyers throughout Europe. Local residents reported seeing groups of well-dressed young people being moved through the area under heavy guard, matching descriptions of the Thornfield students. More importantly, British investigators found documentary evidence that confirmed the presence of several specific students in Liverpool. Hotel registries, shipping manifests, and financial records all contained references that could be traced back to individual students from the academy. The evidence was fragmentary, but it provided the first concrete proof that at least some of the missing students had survived their initial captivity and transport. The Liverpool investigation also revealed the sophisticated methods used by the trafficking network to legitimize their operations. They had established front companies that appeared to be involved in legitimate business activities, including international trade, education consulting, and even charitable organizations claiming to help disadvantaged youth. These cover operations provided credible explanations for the movement of large numbers of young people across international borders. British authorities discovered that several of the Thornfield students had been advertised in underground markets as premium acquisitions available to wealthy buyers seeking highly educated and well-connected young Americans. The advertisements described the students' family backgrounds, educational achievements, and personal qualities in language that was both commercial and deeply disturbing. The revelation that human beings were being marketed like luxury goods shocked investigators and motivated them to work even harder to bring the perpetrators to justice. The investigation in Hamburg provided additional pieces of the puzzle. German authorities had been tracking a criminal organization that specialized in providing services to wealthy individuals seeking to acquire young people for various purposes. The organization operated through exclusive private clubs and secret societies that catered to the darkest desires of their members. Several Thornfield students had apparently been delivered to clients connected to these organizations. The German investigation revealed that the trafficking network had been operating in Europe for over a decade, using connections with corrupt officials and criminal organizations to avoid detection. They had established a sophisticated system for moving victims between different countries, always staying ahead of law enforcement efforts and using the complexity of international jurisdictions to avoid prosecution. However, the international attention generated by the Thornfield case had disrupted their normal operations and forced them to make mistakes that provided opportunities for law enforcement. Several arrests were made in Hamburg, including individuals who had direct knowledge of the American students' presence in Germany. These arrests provided investigators with their first opportunity to interrogate members of the trafficking network and gather intelligence about the organization's structure and operations. The investigation in Buenos Aires proved to be the most challenging due to the distance involved and the limited resources available to Argentine authorities. However, American diplomatic pressure and the involvement of international law enforcement organizations eventually led to cooperation from local officials. The investigation in South America revealed that the trafficking network had been using Argentina as a destination for victims who were intended for long-term exploitation in remote locations where rescue would be virtually impossible. Argentine investigators discovered evidence that several young Americans matching the descriptions of Thornfield students had been transported to remote estancias in the interior of the country. These isolated ranches and farms provided perfect hiding places for victims, far from population centers and law enforcement presence. The vastness of the Argentine interior and the limited transportation networks made tracking and rescue operations extremely difficult. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.